on modern comedy movies, and yet Aristophanes is part of their cultural tradition.
Well, yeah, that's true. No one ever described Aristophanes as being elevated, right? Like Plato, he's not happy with the state of Athenian culture. Unlike Plato, he doesn't know what to choose in its place. All right. Aristophanes is a conservative, but he's only a conservative. He's a conservative with no vision as to how to conserve what he thinks is worth holding on to. All right. He's opposed to the new knowledge. In other words, here he is writing these plays during the Peloponnesian War, and he thinks that the fighting has gone disastrously awry, which is true. And he would like to see a kind of pan-Hellenic, a kind of universal Greek ethic. In other words, we Greeks shouldn't fight each other. One, because it's catastrophic for one side or the other, but two, because we're always in danger from big powers like Persia. All right? So Aristophanes looks back to the time of the Persian Wars, and he said, back then, men were men. Culture was proper. We showed respect to people that deserved it. And we didn't have all these guys asking questions that were impertinent and dangerous. Now, one of the funny things about Aristophanes is that there are times when he gets the diction correct and when he expresses himself in beautiful lyric poetry. If you look towards the end of Lysistrata, which is a strange place to find lyric poetry, he waxes eloquent at the end, and you wouldn't think that possible, about the possibilities of peace between Athens and Sparta. All right? Peace is what any sensible person would want. And since the Sicilian expedition has gone so horribly awry, if we're going to have peace, we better get it fast, and we have to shake something into the men. Now, he doesn't like the new ideas. He doesn't like pre-Socratic physics. He said back in the day, the sun was Apollo's golden chariot, and nobody made any speculation to the contrary, because we knew what was right and what was wrong. Old ways are good ways for Aristophanes. The problem is, the genie's out of the bottle. How are you going to get those old ways back? And that he doesn't explain. He just thinks it's very important that we do that. In some ways, there's a kind of nostalgia for a lost innocence that's just unrecoverable. All right. Now, he doesn't like Socrates. He thinks Socrates is both a sophist and a natural scientist, and in fact he's neither. That kind of detail doesn't really bother Aristophanes. All right? He's against new stuff. And because he's against it, and Socrates is known for asking impertinent questions and for disrespecting important political figures, Aristophanes says that Socrates does not believe in the gods of the city. Right? He wants to find out what the clouds are really made of. And he wants to look at things on above the heavens and beneath the earth. Now, of course, Socrates did nothing of the kind. But what he's doing is taking Socrates as the exemplar of all things that are new and bad, and then attributing it to him. Now, Socrates, of course, has a very powerful criticism of pre-Socratic physics. He says, well, what's the problem? What problems emerge in the human world once we have this new demythologized account of the world? And Socrates actually has some ideas about how to respond to this new change in physics. Aristophanes doesn't. Instead, Aristophanes says, get rid of them all. Burn the thinkery down. The fact that there is no such thing as a thinkery, all right, doesn't get in the way. In addition to not believing the gods of the city, He also corrupts the youth of Athens. Look at Strepsiades and Phidippides. All right. You got a father with no good children who's deep in debt. He doesn't have the wit to learn from Socrates, so he sends his son, and his son ends up slapping him and his mother. So he's engaged. He teaches young men to engage in gross familial misbehavior, and that's political misbehavior. So there's a lack of piety, both political and familial, and that's what he's accusing Socrates of. This is very important because we're going to read in the upcoming weeks the trial and death of Socrates. And, get ready for this, he's going to be accused of not believing in the gods of Athens and corrupting the youth of Athens. And he says in the apology, look, most of you guys don't know me, and that's due to the fact that I won't talk to most of you because you're idiots. He doesn't quite say that, but you're supposed to fill that in. Right? You guys don't know me, but now I'm on trial for my life because I got accused of doing things that I never did. And because you don't like me, you're going to just convict me anyway. This is the best example of why it is necessary to guard art, because art is always educative, and education is the main political problem. All right? Now, Socrates has a different way of approaching education and has some proposals for changing the way young people are educated. Aristophanes says, look, if it was good enough for Granddad and his generation defeated the Persians, it's good enough for us. Yeah, some bright guys over on the islands came up with some good questions. Get rid of all that crap, it's bad for you. Real men are Homeric men, like our grandfathers. They had the real virtue. We don't have that anymore. Why? Our culture's going down the tubes. Number one, Aristophanes hates the demagogues that run Athens. This is people like Cleon, right? And Alcibiades. He has no use for any of these people. Ever since Pericles died, there have been competing politicians trying to get control of the Athenian government. And they do so by persuading the Athenian citizenry, the adult male heads of households, that they know what the right thing to do is. Now, it turns out that the decisions they made were catastrophic, and Aristophanes is reeling from that, and he wants to go after them. And that's where Lysistrata comes in. All right? So Lysistrata is a permanently funny idea. All of you, when I told you what the play was about, you're like, yeah, that's really funny. It's funny now. It was funny 24 centuries ago. That's actually really interesting. It tells you something important. There's something in human nature that either doesn't change or changes at such a glacially slow pace that we find the same tendencies in human nature expressed both then and now. Everybody's a fool for love sometimes. And even if you're not a fool for love, people are often fools for sex. Yes, you know that. Yes, you know perfectly well what I'm saying. And in addition, Aristophanes is great at taking a raunchy idea and making it still cruder. You got to like that about the guy, right? Aristophanes has the mental development of a 9th grader. No, his sense of humor is that of 9th grade boys. Ha, ha, ha. A lizard crapped on Socrates. Ha, ha, ha. Man, subtle he's not. And what does a lizard crapping on Socrates tell you about Socrates' ideas? Doesn't tell you jack. It's funny. Because a lizard crapped on. Oh, if you're 13, this is going to, yeah, right, of course. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Right? If you have the mental development of a 9th grade boy, you're going to find this a riot. And you still do. You're all throwbacks, you gentlemen. You're all laughing like hell saying, yeah, of course. You're not ninth graders anymore. Stop it. It's not funny. And everybody thinks it's funny. That worries me. On the other hand, people have thought Aristophanes was funny for 100 generations now, which is actually a really interesting idea. All right? I mean, sometimes if somebody will start telling a joke that you've heard, you say, oh, that's an old joke. Here, you got a much older joke, and everybody thinks it's funny. All right? And finally, Aristophanes, who's nobody's friend, really, except for a few established families and established politicians. He really dislikes the state of the arts. He said, people actually listen to and admire Euripides now. The hell do they know? Back in the day, tragedy was tragic, and it had superior guys doing superior stuff. Not having sex with their mother. What the hell's wrong with you? Even worse. All right, not telling us that the Trojan women are a matter of concern to us. No, the Trojan War, the Iliads are a matter of concern to us. Who the hell cares what happens to them? That's going to defeat and undermine the war effort. So he and Euripides both think peace is a good idea. Euripides because he just thinks that war is a human horror, which it is, actually. Aristophanes because he thinks his side is going to lose, which is a very different moral stance. All right? And look, Aristophanes is capable of very high discourse. If you look at the end of Lysistrata, when he talks about peace and the benefits of Pan-Hellenism and an end to this destructive war, it's very clear that he is in earnest about this, and it's not the usual slapstick stuff that you have in other parts of it. You also have to remember that Aristophanes is not above taking rude, crude, lewd swipes just to get a laugh. Because look, he's got to keep them laughing. That's his job. So, for example, in Lysistrata, we've been talking about sexual matters for about 1,000 lines, and it goes back and forth, and the women are kicking the butts of the men, which shows you just how bad our culture has become. All right? I mean, this is the most unnatural kind of political order. That's what makes this a comedy. That's what makes this funny. The Greeks would have thought that was like walking on the ceiling. Man, that's just crazy. All right? So women have decided to take control, and these women are going to try and force the men to do their bidding because the men need sex. As a matter of fact, the women need sex too. Everybody needs sex. But Aristophanes isn't going to go there. Right? Occasionally, it seems that the sex boycott is going to break up, but no, Lysistrata is there to put everyone in their place. Now, when about 1,000 lines in, when the herald from Sparta comes, how are the Spartans represented in Lysistrata?
Just as sex crazed as the rest of everybody.
They're sex crazed, yeah, but what else? Yeah.
Oh, my translation had them with like Scottish accents.
Scottish accent, yeah. The idea is that they're from the backwoods. So Scottish accent works. Also, a hillbilly accent works. That I have a translation where they have that, or where they talk like hillbillies. Now, that's not historically accurate, but it does give you a kind of a sense of the way the Athenians looked at the Spartans. Tough, yes, but, you know, just barely human. I mean, as far as the Athenians are concerned, Spartans walk on their knuckles. Right? That this is a lower phase of humanity. And they're in the process of kicking our ass. Right? And not even because we had to lose them, because we lost to ourselves. And so, he writes the frogs in 405. This is the year before the end of the line. And he says, this would be a good time for us to think about the importance of poets. Well, I can think of a lot of other things I would think about, given that the Spartans are knocking on the door. But he wants to talk about poetry. And he wants to vent his spleen against the recently deceased Euripides. Now, you just read Euripides, so you know why. Euripides is one twisted individual. And the stuff he produces is very stimulating and very exciting, but it's deeply amoral or immoral. And his realism seems to focus on the twisted, weird, tortured qualities of the human psyche. All right? So Euripides' Electra is still mourning her dad 10 years after he's dead, and it's implied in Euripides' description of her that she has a powerful, incestuous desire for her dead father and can't get over it. In other words, everybody in Euripides' plays are totally twisted. Aristophanes says, I'm not taking that anymore. Yeah, he was popular. Yeah, he has some talent, but he has a little flask of oil. And again, this is the kind of schoolyard taunt you get in third grade schoolyards or in the White House. Right? And unfortunately, he is taunting his opponents, and he knows how to get a good laugh. So when the Spartan Herald comes in Lysistrata, this is towards the end of the play, you have to remember that he has a prop. It's a 2-foot phallus that he's wearing, right? Now this is something with lizard crap. I mean, this is real big laughs. What? He's got a 2-foot phallus? Everybody have sex. Okay. I mean, great. Look, it's funny. That's part of the problem, all right? For me, and perhaps it's true for you as well, Euripides and Aristophanes, in two different ways, are both among my guilty pleasures. Sometimes I like this stuff, which is not a good sign. Sometimes I like Euripides, which is even worse. All right. On the other hand, in order to understand Socrates and in order to understand the Platonic dialogues, you have to understand the internal political currents of Athens, which means you got to know Aristophanes. He's not as important a poet as the three tragedians. He's certainly not an elevated poet, but he is permanently funny. He's figured out how to make people laugh. All right? Sex jokes are big fun. There are 100 different ways of doing that. If you have the Greek, particularly in Lysistrata, there are all kinds of plays on words about sex organs and sex acts and sex. And it sells. The audience really likes it. On the other hand, they do have to realize that, well, once you get to the frogs, he says, you know what we need to get out of this problem? Because next year the Spartans are going to destroy us. We need to get a really good poet. Well, okay, not everyone sees that as being our most pressing problem currently, but he does. Why? Because it's our culture that has led us to this terrible impasse. Our leadership was composed of idiots, or actually, to put it more precisely, our leadership is composed of half-wits that get elected by nitwits, and the half-wits explain things to the nitwits, but they never get it right because they're half-wits. There's only one full wit in town, that's Socrates, and they kill him. All right? So everyone who's seen Athens said, wow, seeing this close up, it's amazing how messed up this is. Obviously, Aristophanes is not fond of democracy, but he's also not fond of Spartan oligarchy. All right? Instead, what he wants to go back is to the old ways, the old families. So when we read Plato's Symposium, one of the most important figures there is Aristophanes. And it's in the Symposium that Plato pays Aristophanes back for his maligning of Socrates and his poisoning of the public mind and for his complicity in getting Socrates killed. So Plato says, look, I'll take care of this. I'm going to write my own little play. Because you've got to remember, Socratic dialogues are dramas. And he said, my play is going to be a play for the mind rather than the senses. My play is going to be my dialogue is going to be a play of ideas rather than a play of sensations. Which is why you can still put Aristophanes' plays on in the local theater, and it'll work just fine. But by definition and by intent, the Platonic dialogues cannot be played on stage. There are lots of examples of narration in which no one's doing the narrating. And there are actions and descriptions of longer arguments saying, look, eventually he gave up and agreed. So the point is, Plato is writing dramas that relate to the mind the way comedy and tragedy relate to the senses. You see that on stage. You never see a Platonic dialogue on stage. You read it and you enact it in the theater of the mind. All right? Now, these plays tell us something about the ordinary man in the street in Athens, right? Which you would not easily find out because most of the access we have to Athenian culture and history through the historians like Thucydides or through Plato or through Aeschylus and the great early tragedians, most of what we find out is about elite culture. In other words, these are the elite. We find out about what was practical and what was useful and what was characteristic of the leading families of Athens. Aristophanes, on the other hand, brings us to the actual man in the street. All right, crude, rude, lewd. All right, and he is representing that stratum of society as no one else does, and he's also writing for that stratum of society. Elderly dowagers are not likely to find Aristophanes a scream. Stupid young men with ninth grade mentalities, yeah, they're going to love it. All right, so there's going to get big laughs. All right, so we find out, for example, in Aristophanes, not the plays I had you assigned, but in some of his other plays, he frequently makes homosexual jokes, which is not the kind of thing you're going to see in Plato's because Plato is so clearly gay. No, look, I don't know what Socrates' sex life was. I mean, he's just too weird and too different. I mean, as Alcibiades says at the end of the symposium, he does not love the way we do. All right, the stuff he loves is different from what we love. On the other hand, it's clear that the average man in the street does not like these mincing fops. He does not like these flamingly queer aristocrats. And so there's lots of big jokes. There's lots of big fag jokes all the time. I mean, Aristophanes is famous for it. All right? And if he does it once, he'll do it again and again because you can't encourage him. Once you start laughing, he's going to make more of those. All right? So Aristophanes is going to tell us about the attitudes and beliefs of the ordinary Athenian as opposed to the Athenian elite. And the ordinary Athenian has pretty much the cultural development that we're going to see in, say, the audience for professional wrestling, right? I mean, these guys are rowdy, they're liquored up, they constantly have rude, crude, lewd observations to make about the people around them. Women are supposed to stay home, and if they don't, then they're a scandal. And of course, men are supposed to be men rather than flamingly queer, which Aristophanes just can't abide. So Aristophanes is the spokesman for the old-fashioned, for the underclass, not the slaves, but those Athenians who are citizens but don't have much in the way of money and don't have much in the way of political pull. He says what they want. In other words, these guys don't want to go out and get massacred by the Spartans. They think it would be okay if we made peace with the Spartans, provided, of course, it allows us to have sex. All right? So Aristophanes is not a deep thinker. He's a strangely gifted individual. There are some poets or some artists that have surprising artistic gifts, but just no vision. All right? There are a lot of good writers that don't have anything to say. And what Aristophanes has to say is that old stuff is good stuff. And he doesn't want to talk about the details because he doesn't know what to do with the details. Right? He can't tell the difference between Socrates and Thales. He can't tell the difference between Socrates and Gorgias. Okay. Notice that in Lysistrata, there's a number of times when he says, when they make references to Homer, going back to that old Homeric standard, let's go, in other words, it's a little bit like saying, let's go back to the spirit of the founding fathers. Well, that's a great idea. How do you propose to do that? Well, I don't need to get into the details. Let's just get back to the founding fathers. Well, I mean, look, I think that the world's a mess, and I think that the government's a mess, I think the society's a mess, but I have no idea what use it is to be told that we must go back to the founding fathers. The hell does that mean? All right? Aristophanes is very much along those lines. Let's go back to the Persian War, pretend this didn't happen. Well, unfortunately it did, and next year the Spartans are going to destroy us. All right? And the Spartans talk like hicks. All right? Now, the clouds allows us to talk about Socrates, and this is actually worth thinking about. Socrates was in the audience for the clouds for its initial performance. And of course, someone playing Socrates in the clouds is going to have on a mask, and in this case it looks like Socrates, because Socrates was an ugly guy, right? He's short, he's squat, he has a pushed-in face, and you can easily caricature that as a mask. Also, he has a characteristic kind of rolling gait, he's short, and no doubt that was mimicked by the actor as well. But here's what's interesting. This is part of the Apocrypha about Socrates. We don't know if it's true for certain, but it might well be. It's said that during the play, when the character Socrates in the clouds was introduced, the audience went nuts because everybody knew who it was. And Socrates was sitting there. And, much to his credit, Socrates got up, turned around, and looked at the audience, saying, look, check me out, check it out, see it. I got it, it's Socrates, yeah, and he thinks I'm a sophist. Right. So Socrates, instead of running away or blanching, turns around and says, bring it. Yeah, here I am. You don't know who I am? Aristophanes doesn't know who I am, but he knows how to make a great joke, and the joke is, ha ha ha, Socrates gets crapped on by a lizard. And now we have to burn the thinker, even though there's no such thing. The idea is we need some big bang-up ending where Socrates gets what he's coming to him, which is rejection by Athenian society because he doesn't believe in the gods, which goes back to the pre-Socratic physicists, and he corrupts the youth of Athens. He's a bad influence. Now, I think it's a fair argument that Aristophanes is a far worse influence than Socrates is. When he says, think about morality and virtue, Aristophanes says, let's think about sex. I have 101 jokes about sex, and I'm going to send out a character with a 2-foot phallus, in case you didn't notice that this was about sex. Okay. Subtlety is not here. When we get to Plato, you'll find an absolutely astonishing degree of subtlety. But Aristophanes is primitive, rude, and crude, but he represents an important element in opinion in public affairs in Athens at the time, during the Peloponnesian War. And that's what you need to know. If you didn't have somebody like Aristophanes, and you would get an utterly biased view, where we're going to talk about the top 1 or the top 5% of Athenians in terms of political influence and money. Aristophanes says there's a lot more than that, and it's all rude. Okay. Who's going to present on this?
Which one are we doing?
What?
Which one first?
Why don't we start with why don't we do them in chronological order? There's something to be said for that. So how about clouds? All right, good.
And just to start off, a nice little quote I found by Aristophanes.
Aristophanes that I think gives us some nice insight into his character is, quickly bring me a beaker of wine so that I may wet my mind and say something clever. This is Aristophanes. He's called the father of comedy, and I would also add a great social commentator and outspoken and vulgar social commentator. And I think that is basically what The Clouds is. A commentary on where Athens is and where he's kind of trying to show the Athenians where they might end up. So just kind of to drop it into, to create the setting, like Dr. Sugrue said, the Athenians have gone through some hard blows in the war. A lot of people want peace. And so comedy is replacing the tragedy of Euripides and Sophocles. Aristophanes is going to comment on both Socrates, who's like leader of education, and then Cleon, who's also he's the populist leader of a pro-war faction in Athens, and so he hates on him in the play as well. So Aristophanes is basically pointing towards the bad leadership in Athens. I think there's a lot of self-reflection going on in regards to like who Athens is and where they're going, like I said before. And we'll see that in the two conflicts between philosophy and sophistry, and then also between the father and son, I'm going to butcher their name, but Strepsiades and Phidippides. And just a note about their names, Strepsiades means twisting, wriggling, basically like debt dodger, which is what his character does throughout the whole play. And then Phidippides is, his name means parsimonious cavalier of the skimping aristocrat. So quite a mouthful. And so basically they explain it in the play, but he's kind of a combination. His father is this kind of this money-conscious farmer, and then his mother is like an aristocrat, and he's going to be the combination kind of both of them. And then ultimately he will be like the new model Athenian at the end of the play, who's a sophist, but he ultimately turns on his father. So, and then also the scientific revolution is taking place, so not just Socrates, but Democritus is also doing some interesting things with the study of atoms. So this scientific revolution is taking place, and these are the settings for Aristophanes' commentary. So some themes throughout the play. I have to start with kind of pointing out some of the influence of the Bacchae and Dionysius. We see them, players swearing by Dionysus in the beginning of the play. I thought one particularly interesting example is when Strepsiades said that he was mad for education, which is kind of he was going to Socrates. He knew he needed to like get rid of his debt, and he goes and he's like banging on the door of the thinkery, and he's like, I'm mad for education. And then also when the son and the father have their fight at the end, that's also that's a Bacchic, or the influence of the Bacchae, because it's like nature kind of turning upon itself. And then also at the end of the play, when Strepsiades jumps on top of the roof of the thinkery and burns it to the ground, is very Dionysian. And so this connects into the idea, one of my favorite things about the play was the image of the clouds itself. I thought it was kind of brilliant and really was what connected the entire play together. It was really unique because all the plays we've read, we see choruses of people, and sometimes they're old men or women, but like these were actual, like the clouds were the chorus. And it was a genius depiction because they basically represent sophistry. And they can shape into anything in a split second. Sometimes clouds like themselves don't really seem like they're moving, but they are, so they're kind of sneaky. And in this play, they represent like the new gods. Zeus is out. They're the new influence. The stronger argument is going to win over the weaker. But it's still kind of wispy, unclear, because we still see the influence of Zeus and Dionysus, and like all the gods are like named throughout the play. But then we're being told that, oh no, by Socrates, that like the clouds, that they're the new gods. And Strepsiades we see him have a difficult time accepting this because he's from the old, like he's one of he represents like the old Athenians, like Aristophanes himself, basically. He has trouble accepting it while his son is going to be educated really easily by Socrates. And so I think this line from the clouds, so Strepsiades ends up, so he ends up kind of accepting what Socrates says, but then at the end the clouds like turn, when his son turns against him, he turns to the clouds and he says, how did this happen? Like, I trusted you guys. And they say to him, and this is a quote in my version of page 149, quote, because this is what we are, insubstantial clouds men build their hopes upon, shining tempters formed of air, symbols of desire. And so we act, beckoning, alluring foolish men through their dishonest dreams of gain to overwhelming ruin. They are schooled by suffering, they learn at last to fear the gods. So ultimately, the clouds are a symbol of irony because they are not what we think they are by the end of the play. And I think this is, like we talked about before, like language, deterioration of language is a symbol of a culture dying. So they are symbolic. So Aristophanes, I think, is pointing to like where's Athens going, you know? And in his play itself, like the clouds don't say what they don't say what they mean, or they turn out to be not what they are, which is symbolic, I think. So then this also leads into the idea of the convection oven theory, which is like this is part of the scientific revolution. So outside of the thinkery, they have a convection oven, which basically the image represents this new idea of the cosmos, the universe, that apparently Socrates has thought up in the play. And so basically the shape, so it's like this oven, and it's shaped kind of like this bowl that's like bellied at the bottom and inverted at the top. There's like heat and flames and everything at the top, and then the actual burning wood, and then the ashes at the bottom, and that symbolizes, so the ashes are the dead, the actual burning wood is like the living humans on Earth, and then the heat and the flames, at the top, which is kind of like, which is the clouds, they're also the new gods, they're the new gods. So it's just, and then the oven itself is like the universe. So, and that's the idea that Socrates is talking about, and he tells Strepsiades that this is it, and so Zeus is out, and it's the actual god. The clouds themselves are the new gods, but it's all based in science and nature. It's kind of weird, but so the clouds represent these new kinds of gods, but then ultimately at the end of the play, it's all flipped on its head because Strepsiades jumps on top of the thinkery, which is kind of a symbol of like the actual the theory itself, the convection oven theory, and then and he burns it to the ground, and Socrates comes out choking, and so basically like the theory dies, like it almost like it kills itself. So he like jumps on top and burns it, and like becomes like the new god, like he takes the place of the clouds, like the new gods, and burns it to the ground. So it's kind of like this weird, like it kills itself, like it turns it on itself, but the clouds are kind of, the clouds are the main connecting image throughout the play, and so basically the problem is, because the premise and the problem are like kind of the same thing. So the premise is this new theory of the gods, and then the problem also becomes that theory, and then the play kind of is a convergence of the two. So another theme is the character of Socrates, and Aristophanes hates on him the entire play. He's portrayed as the father of sophistry. He's the one who compels Strepsiades to worship the trinity of the gods, chaos, the clouds, and bamboozle. These are like the three new gods. And he's the proponent of this false worship, and his thinkery ends up falling on top of him in the end. And he comes out, so Strepsiades burns the whole thing down. Socrates comes out, he's choking on the heat and the smoke, and he can't speak, which is also another like language is deteriorating. The culture, Athens is dying, but it's turning in itself, and there's not really any other place to go. The play like still just ends kind of with ashes, and it's like, okay, well, what do we do about that? I don't know.
Kill Socrates.
Yeah. Well, yeah, he's not dead yet at the end of the play, so there's still that to do, but I don't know. So then, last but not least, the old education versus the new education. So the old is philosophy, and it's really interesting how he had them as like two cocks fighting. He represented them as like these animals, like in a cockpit, which would probably be really amusing to the Athenian audience that was watching. So the old education, which is philosophy, is based on discipline, decorum, duty. This is what formed the men at Marathon. The worship of Homer, lawyers and politicians are looked down upon. Morality and honor are their cornerstones. The new education is sophistry. They look down on moderation and decorum. The sophistry tells you to obey your nature, give in to pleasure, and this is what the clouds want. So we have this kind of connecting theme of, I think, of like turning to like nature over nurture. Because the clouds and then giving in to your pleasures, those are all things that are proponents of the new education, and they end up winning. So in the end, nature, the Bacchae win over nurture, science and argument over morality, and this is ultimately manifested in the fight between the father and the son, which is a kind of like turn on nature, a mini civil war. Moderation and decorum are overturned for frenzy, chaos, and bamboozlement. Overall, I thought the play was, it was kind of strange and crazy. A little like, I don't know, ADHD was like all over the place. And then the influence of the Bacchae are present now not in tragedy but comedic form. So, and then Aristophanes definitely has a bone to pick with a lot of the leaders in Athens, and he likes to break tradition, because this comedy, when I was researching it, I found that it actually wasn't very well accepted, which makes sense because he's like he's taking two opposing ideas and putting them in one play. So like he's not really going to please the entire audience because there's going to be a lot of like dispute because people are going to believe different things. So it's not like it's like a crowd pleaser because it's like a comedy of ideas. And when I was researching it like he breaks a lot of like common comedic traditions. So he doesn't use a lot of the right format and doesn't put like certain songs in at the end. So it wasn't super like well accepted or like liked. But I think that's because it was kind of one of his more serious, as compared to Lysistrata and the Frogs. This one is probably one of the more serious ones because it's like the ideas are actually like real, and he has Socrates at the end. So
That was very good. That's an excellent presentation. That's what I'm looking for, somebody that has something to say about a book you read. You did a very fine job. Who's next?
That's right.
All right, give us a start. You get the rude.
So clearly this play is very explicit, very different from the other ones. But so this is basically a satire of both all the men and the women, the Athenian men, the Athenian women, the Spartan men, the Spartan women. And it was mainly written for entertainment, but Aristophanes also wanted, there was an underlying philosophy. He wanted to explain the gender roles of the time, the war, politics, like deconstruct the Acropolis, morality, corruption, all that too. So it wasn't just for pure entertainment. He did have some hidden messages in there too. So it takes place during the Peloponnesian War, and basically the theme is the women are tired of staying home with their like no family. They have to do everything by themselves. The men have been gone for so long, and they haven't really done anything. The war's not over, so basically the men aren't really getting that far. And she asks the question, she wants to gather a bunch of women together, and she says, well, how do we stop this war? And she says the main way they can do it is by abstinence. And she doesn't tell them this yet until they're there, and she's waiting for the woman, and they're not showing up at first. And she basically criticizes them coming at their unhealthy desire for sex. She says, if this was an orgy, all the women of the town would be here right now. So basically she started off saying like, this is terrible, this is what all the women are looking for, this is why the war's still going on, blah, blah, blah.
Euripides lives.
Yeah. So then she first goes and tells her plan to Cleon Kiki, is that her name? I'm just going to say Cleon. She tells her plan.
Cleomite, but that's okay.
Cleomite, that's what it was. And she says the plan to end the war lies with all the women. And Cleon is confused because she says, how is this true? Glamour is our only talent. and Lysistrata says that's exactly what it is. The only way to stop this war is through us, and that's when she tells everyone their plan of abstinence from sex. And at first, all the women are confused. They're like, "No, I don't want to do this." They're upset by it. At first, it doesn't sound good to them. One of the women says, Cleon says, "On with the war. There's no way I'm giving up sex. That's too much." Miriam says, "I'd much rather walk through fire." And Lysistrata bluntly responds. She says, "Utter sluts. This is why we are perfect material for utter tragedy." So she says, if we don't follow through with this, if we just let the war, we're just going to turn into complete tragedy. And oddly enough, like we were talking about, Lampedo, she's the smart woman, and they're supposed to be the uneducated ones. And she actually thinks this plan's a good idea. And when I was reading her first lines, my first instinct was like Southern accent, like hillbilly type talking. And I was like, it's funny how she's the smart one, and the Athenian women are supposed to be educated, or the Athenian society is supposed to be educated and smart. And when I first heard of the plan, I was like, wow, that's actually a good idea. I was like, that's the most genius thing that they could have come up with. But just from that standpoint, I was like, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. So after Lysistrata, they eventually all agree. And after Lysistrata says, if you don't do this, you're basically carrying out your stereotypical sex-driven roles. And they decide to take an oath. And I thought the oath was very, very weird oath. The way it was worded was pretty funny. It says, "I will withhold rights of access or entrance from every husband, lover, or casual acquaintance who moves in my direction in erection." And it's pretty crude, but when I was reading it, it's absurd, but that's the point of the whole thing.
Sex farces are always too much.
Yeah. So they all decide to take the oath of chastity. And the next plan is to take over the Citadel, which is basically where all the money is held, where all the political and civil events are held. And oddly, it was weird, the women just were able to take it over so easily from the men, showing like the weakness of the men. And when the men first arrive, they're confused why they're there, and they try to smoke them out. And that actually backfires, and all the smoke blows in their face, and they look like complete idiots. And the women there threaten to castrate the men, and they get scared and leave. So this right here shows how the men do not know how to handle anything. That's why the war's still going on. The men look like idiots. The women look like the smart ones. It's that like reversal of gender role that we've been talking about this whole time. And then the commissioner, this was very funny. He's the commissioner of public safety, whatever that means. And he is clueless when he comes in. He thinks the women are just participating like an orgy or whatever. And he orders his men to arrest the women. Well, first they get in with a crowbar, they break down the gates, and Lysistrata appears. And he tries to arrest them, but 4 times he fails. And they're supposed to be Athens' finest men. It shows how pathetic that they are, that they can't even take down the women. Like, Lysistrata jabs the first man with a spindle, and then Cleon hits the man with a chamber pot or whatever, and then one girl threatens to pull his hair, and they all cower away and get defeated, which is pretty pathetic. And then we see here, like the old Homer, like in Homer we saw before on page 396, they dress it. I don't get how he just willingly dressed up like a woman. I was kind of confused by that, but they just dress him up as a woman, the commissioner, after his men were defeated or whatever. And Lysistrata says, "Hike up your skirts and card your wool and gnaw your beans and stay at home while we rewrite Homer. Ye woman must wive ye worry." And that was basically a play on words, because the old phrase was, "Ye men must husband ye worry," which means what Athens needs is a man, but they are rewriting it to what Athens needs is a woman.
More of that new knowledge, the rewriting of Homer.
So that all that happens, and then as some time goes by, and the women start to give up hope that this is not working. They're kind of getting sex crazed, and one of the girls begins to lose hope after a while. She says she just wants to get laid. Some of the women are just leaving to go have sex with their husband and then come back. Others make up a story about how they're pregnant, and Lysistrata doesn't buy that at all, because she says, "You weren't pregnant when you came in here," and she basically puts a metal helmet in her stomach and says she's pregnant and that she has to leave, and she bangs on her stomach and clearly hears the metal. So she's like, yeah, nice try. And then the woman, so Lysistrata, finally she regathers, reminds them what they're doing and the overall purpose. She says on page 413, she says, don't you think them, speaking about the men, don't you think they miss you just as much? I can assure you their nights are every bit as hard as yours. And then she tells them about the prophecy. It says, ye then shall thunder Zeus to their suffering, establish a stop by making lower the upper. So the woman will overpower the men in this case. And then she says, later down, she says, but should these swallows indulging their lust for purge loose, dissolve their flocks in winged dissension and singly depart the sacred stronghold. So basically she's saying if they give it to their lust, the women are going to look even more idiotic and the war is going to continue anyway. So just stay strong with this and it'll work. And then the funniest part was when Canisius's, or Myrrhaene's husband, Canisius, comes, and he comes running in, clearly in pain. They say he is full erection, clearly in pain, carrying a child, and he tries to use the child as sympathy to his wife, saying, look, my kid hasn't eaten in days, like, the house is a mess, like, we need the woman back. And I was just thinking, what could he have, like, how could he have not fed a child? That just shows how pathetic men are. They can't even feed their kids, bathe them. And,
Kinesius means motion, and it has a sexual resonance. The kind of motioning as a mind is sexual.
Yeah. So then Lysistrata's worried that she'll give in, and she says, don't worry, I got it. And this scene was actually hilarious. I was laughing when I was reading. She basically teases him in full. She agrees. She says, okay, I'll have sex with you. Nobody can know, though. And he goes, okay, it's okay. I'll take the blame. He's basically just rushing her into it. And first she gives him a peck, and then she says, I'll be right back. I need a pillow. So then she goes and gets the pillow, and he goes, okay, let's do this now. And she goes, well, don't you think we need a mattress? And he goes, no, this place is fine. We can just do it right here, right now. And he's just getting even more stressed out. And then she says she has to go get a blanket, and at this point he's just like, he can't take it anymore. And I think the funniest thing was when she said she went and got perfume, and he's like, okay, all right, finally, we're ready. And she goes, well, I don't think it smells good enough. So then she goes and gets a different one. And at that point she just leaves him there, and he's completely frustrated. And then that's when the Spartan herald comes in and basically is giving the same situation of all the Spartan men. He's saying, well, he comes in, and the commissioner asks if he is carrying a concealed weapon. Basically, his concealed weapon. He's hurting. He's hurting down low. He's in pain. And he says how the situation in Sparta is just as bad. The men are suffering, and they're willing to make a truce because they can't take it anymore. So then basically what the women plan work, the men, of course, the men and women, they make amends, and they gave a great quote. This reminded me of U2's song. They said, he says, life with woman is hell, life without woman is hell. So basically, you can't live with or without you, with or without women. And then the Athenian delegation enters Canisius, who's supposed the Athenian general. He literally says, we have come as delegates of the sexual congress, which makes it just a complete joke at this point. And all the men just want this over with so bad. And then, of course, you have to continue with peace. They bring peace out. She's like a naked woman, and all the men are just suffering through this because they're seeing a naked woman on stage, in front of everybody. And they use her as a map to show how they're going to split up the lands of Greece. Literally pointing at her body parts. And the funniest part was Canisius says he will be destroyed if this is drawn out much longer. And obviously you can read into those words.
Delightfully tasteless.
And then all the women and the men, and that's how it ends.
Very good. Very good. You appreciated a funny point. Good for you. It's not an easy thing to talk on. Your presentations are getting better, or maybe you just like Aristophanes.
It makes it better.
You should use the frogs. Go ahead.
Okay, so I expected more frogs to be in this play, but they only show up for like 3 pages and then they're gone. But I think that they're honestly, I mean, they're definitely a very important part of the play because the play is named after them. So it's like Aristophanes giving us some sort of subliminal messages like, oh, pay attention to what these things are saying because they're important. Okay, so it was written in 405 BC. It was performed at the Lanai, which is a festival for Dionysus, where it won first place. And just to give a brief summary before I begin. So this begins with Dionysus and his servant Xanthias, and they're traveling to Hercules' house because Dionysus wants to get to the underworld to bring back a great poet, which will obviously solve all the problems. And Hercules, while sort of not helpful at first, eventually gives them this a roundabout way to go to the ferryman, and he's like, okay, go across the river, and then you'll find the house of Hades, and you knock, and they'll be there. But when they find Charon, he refuses to bring Xanthias because Xanthias is not a slave who he would have brought Xanthias if he had fought at this particular battle where slaves were freed, but since Xanthias didn't, he is not allowed to take the ferry, so he has to walk around. And then while they're rowing across the river, this is where the frogs come in, and they have this this very odd chant, which actually Dionysus kind of becomes entranced by, and he starts to mimic them while he's trying to focus on rowing. But the frogs leave them with this kind of creepy line. They say, "Have no fear, we'll coax all day until we blow our lungs asunder, and you'll never beat us." Which, it's kind of ironic to think of frogs as these creepy underworld characters, but it's really weird because I took this to mean as Aristophanes, this particular line, "You'll never, never beat us," kind of utilizing these creatures to tell us that he himself is never going to stop hounding us until we change something about our society. And then after the frogs leave, Dionysus and Dionysius come upon a monster, Empausa, I believe it is, but the creature leaves eventually. But then they come upon the chorus, which is a group of men and women, the strophe and the antistrophe, and they kind of serve as the breakers of the fourth wall. They talk to directly to the audience a lot of the time and kind of give a lot of directed commentary on the state of Athens, which I'm going to cover later. And then after the chorus comes the first time they move on to Pluto's house, or Hades. And after entering the door, they undergo a few different trials because Hercules is first not welcome by the first person. So Hercules is or Dionysus, excuse me. He's like, okay, Xanthias, take this clothing because I don't want to be in trouble anymore. So Xanthias wears it, and then the next person to come to the door is actually loves Hercules, and she's like, oh, let me give you women and food and all this wonderful stuff. And then Dionysus is like, hold up a second, I want that stuff back because I want women and food. But then the third person comes to the door, and then there ensues a challenge to see whether it is in fact Dionysus or Xanthias who is the god character, because they both claim to be a god. But so there's this challenge between them, and they're both flogged. And the rules are whoever utters the first sound is obviously not God, because gods don't feel pain. Neither of them utter a sound, although Dionysus sort of slips a little bit, but then he starts to quote poetry. So, because he's obviously not focused on the pain because there is no pain, so he's philosophizing or something.
Hold on for a second. You have to imagine Dionysus as he was in Euripides, highly effeminate. So what you have is somebody dressed as Hercules, but he's got to play this RuPaul queer. Okay, I mean, flamingly queer, dressed as Hercules. And until you get the lisp and the limp-wristed stuff and all the characteristic stereotypical gay behavior, you're not going to see why this is going to be funny. here we have the mighty Hercules, all right, except that he's a same-sexer. And not only that, but he is foreign and effeminate, all right? So he's exactly what you don't expect a Greek hero like Hercules to be, all right? This back and forth, you have to imagine him changing from his gay demeanor to straight demeanor, back and forth. And it's clear that Dionysus is a kind of psychological shapeshifter. Okay, and there's implicitly a whole running series of homosexual jokes.
But yes, so going back to the beginning, actually, I just remembered Dionysus is described as wearing bright yellow. And Hercules kind of makes fun of this. He's like, "You're really an idiot. You're wearing my clothing over bright crocus yellow. Like, it's ridiculous." But anyway, continuing on. So then, after they find the true God character, they move on to looking for, or Dionysus rather, continues to look for his poet to save the world. So during this feast that the house of Pluto spreads for Hercules, there's this contest. They find Euripides and Aeschylus, and interestingly enough, Sophocles is not really mentioned as much because he had just died the year previous. When he died, Frogs was already in production, so Aristophanes couldn't really fit Sophocles into the canon of this play. So he's only mentioned a few times, but when he is mentioned once, they're like, "Oh wait, no, his son is out, we'll give his son a chance, so we don't want to bring back the dad, so we're just going to leave Sophocles at rest." So during this contest, Euripides and Aeschylus are fighting over this chair, which is the person who holds the chair is the greatest writer. And so Euripides and Aeschylus, they go back and forth and quote their own plays, and then they critique each other, and it's really hilarious. Because at one point, this is my particular favorite part of the play, is when Euripides is quoting his prologues. And at the end, he gives 3 or 4 lines, and then either Aeschylus or Dionysus shouts, "And he lost his cruet of oil," which I don't know why that's hilarious.
Oil,
yeah, his flask of oil. Just to prove that Euripides' meter is just boring, and there's no variation. You can fit whatever you want, wherever you want. But rather, Aeschylus is varied and more poetical and flowery and of a higher form, rather. And so after a lot of going back and forth, Aeschylus is named the winner of this contest. Dionysus chooses Aeschylus, and then Sophocles, they bring up Sophocles again, who's left to guard the chair when Aeschylus leaves Hades to save the world or whatever with his great poetry. And so we leave off with them leaving Hades. Okay, so a couple of notes about insights that I found in the text. Dionysus, we spoke already of. He's rather foolish, excitable, definitely. He means well, certainly. He's on this quest to bring back the good parts of society, going back to the Homeric with Aeschylus. But he actually admits to being easily swayed during the contest, and he's also easily scared, so he kind of runs and hides from problems instead of facing them as a true hero would. Xanthias, on the other hand, is slightly more crafty. He's somewhat of a more Odysseus type of character, although not quite on the same intellectual level, but he's able to manipulate Dionysus into giving him Hercules' garb. And he actually refrains from uttering any complaints when he's flogged. He actually doesn't say anything. So he's actually stronger than Dionysus, who's a god, although albeit a feminine god, but still. So in terms of the whole overall plot, this trying to find a poet I found very similar to sort of kind of a quest to rescue Athens, because it is a year away from being destroyed, and while Aristophanes doesn't have foresight, it's obvious that it's in deep disarray, kind of disarray, and Athens is a mess. And so Athenians at this time, Aristophanes, excuse me, decided that the Athenians obviously needed hard truths. Aristophanes is not a man of subtlety. He literally says things to your face, in the chorus. He'll just say them right to your face. And this play is sort of a wake-up call for Athens, or an attempt to wake Athens up to see what's actually going on beneath the surface of all this high art. And so he uses the chorus to break this fourth wall and give commentary on the state of Athens. And he's using this whole play as a teaching moment. So he can do what he can personally as a playwright to try to turn this state around. And the frogs, as well as the chorus, even though they only show up for a short amount of time, they're kind of the doomsayers of Athens, almost. And they give some warning, they're talking about, Aristophanes uses a few different characters, namely the frogs in the chorus, to give these warnings, which are not at all subtle, which is part of why I think he's fantastic, is because he's not ever subtle. And it's really easy to grasp what he's trying to tell you, because he literally just tells you. So some lines from the chorus that I found quite striking, particularly on my copy, it's page 555, the chorus. This is the women's half of the chorus, the antistrophe. They say, look, the meadow is on fire, and knobby old knees frisk about, of men oblivious of care and the long leviathan of years as they adore. So this is kind of a commentary on the fact that Athens is on fire, and it's going down in flames, and the old men, the rulers, are not doing anything about it, and they're just kind of frisking off and not helping the situation at all. And another line was page 559. This is the men's half of the chorus. They say, "For you were the one who decreed while laughing that my sandals be torn and my garb be worn." Aristophanes is making a direct commentary on the fact that Athens is in fact going bankrupt, and it's kind of falling to pieces, and it's not the glory of the old days anymore, which we need to go back to. And then Euripides versus Aeschylus is an interesting section, because it's kind of the final dichotomy between the old versus the new. And Euripides is depicted, obviously Aristophanes is biased, and Euripides is depicted as more of a complainer, wants to get rid of the old because it's too confusing and there's too many word repetitions, and it's not as easy to understand, and it's often lost in translation. Aeschylus is depicted as sort of old and stubborn. He's very set in his ways, and old ways are the best ways. And ultimately, Dionysus chooses, or Aristophanes technically, chooses Aeschylus over Euripides, because the old ways were the glory days, and that's when we had wealth and power and honor, and those were the better times, and we need to return to that. So he brings Aristophanes brings Aeschylus back in, and it's back the old glory days of Athens.
Very good. That's a great way to deal with the fact that the Spartans are about to destroy us. Aristophanes has the world's first poetry slam. That's what goes on there.
I feel like he would like Euripides more, just because of the kind of absurdity in the Medea and the other play, more than the Aeschylus plays with the libation bearers and stuff.
Well, he's, how can I put it? He doesn't like what Euripides represents, because Euripides represents the new knowledge and the new culture.
Yeah.
All right. So Euripides is tearing down the old Homeric ideal by saying, "What about the Trojan women? You sure that's a good idea?
Yeah.
You did the same thing, and it may come around to get you." So first of all, Euripides is challenging the epic tradition. All right? It's not an accident that he's a contemporary of Socrates, because he's also attacking that epic tradition. Aristophanes is, how can I put it? He's a popular writer in the sense that people are going to find him very accessible. And that same is true to some extent of Euripides. I mean, the people in his plays are twisted, but they have real human twists, real human peculiarities. Whereas in Aeschylus, as Euripides says, everybody sounds like a marble statue. They strike a pose, and they say deep, weighty, serious, worthy things. And he says, that's boring. Let me show you some really interesting stuff. Medea, that's interesting. So, Aeschylus is an aristocratic, old-fashioned writer. All right? And what Aristophanes is doing is weighing the old culture and the new culture, finding that the new culture is a mistake. That's what's killing us. All right? On the other hand, how bringing Aeschylus back, how that's going to prevent the Spartans from coming over the wall, that never gets explained. All right? So, neither Euripides nor Aristophanes is especially subtle, right? I mean, you look at something like the Bacchae, and you say, well, whatever this is, it's not subtle, right? This is pretty rude. This is just the extremity of human experience. And Aristophanes would do anything for a laugh, anything to make a point against those he opposes. Almost every one of his plays is focused on one or two or three eminent people, and he throws appalling personal abuse at them. It's not just that you're wrong in your policy preferences. You're dubiously masculine. You are dubiously intelligent. You are, in fact, something worthy of our scorn. All right? Remember that the justification that's been given for comedy throughout much of its history is that it's a good thing because it holds evil up to ridicule. And there are many evil people that can cope with the danger of being captured or imprisoned or punished, but there's almost nobody that can stand being laughed at. Something to be said there. And that's just as well in the case of Aristophanes, because he doesn't have the mental wherewithal to create reasoned arguments against somebody like Socrates, or even against Euripides. Instead, he has a little flask of oil. Ha, ha. Well, it's not that funny, but he repeats it until it becomes funny. All right? So what you have to keep in mind is that Aeschylus is old culture, so we liked him. And then, at the end, he tacks on the idea, look, don't let Euripides take that seat of the, poet laureate. Have Sophocles sit there, because he's a better man, too. And you can see how the change in Greek tragedy over time will become less and less congenial to somebody like Aristophanes. Now, here's the deal. You have finally gotten to the point where I can have you start to read Plato. That's what that's what the last 2 months have been for. I know it's going to sound strange to you, but you are now at the point where you can begin to read Plato. Now, what I would emphasize is that Plato is something that needs to be read and read and read. It's not like Aristophanes. It is what it seems like it is. Plato, something very different. All right? Every one of the readings we've had so far speaks directly to some of the Platonic dialogues that we're going to be doing next. All right? And I'll give you the examples, and I'll show them to you when we look at them. The greatest of the Platonic dialogues is the Republic, and that is one of the great achievements of the human mind. It's an artwork in the same league as the Rembrandt self-portraits or Beethoven's Ninth. I mean, it's one of the great artistic achievements ever created. It also is a new religion, and it also is an answer to all the outstanding philosophical problems that have been left since the pre-Socratics. And in addition to that, it's an attempt to supersede epic, tragedy, lyric, and comedy. So, Plato has a big agenda, actually kind of an insane agenda, because if you think about the quality of Greek literature and the quality of Greek thought, Plato says, I've got cleanup here. All right? I'm a better poet than the poets. I'm a better political theorist than the guys who think about politics. I'm a better thinker about nature, about human nature, about society, about ethics, about all the issues that have been raised so far. Plato is the first person to try and wrap up the entirety of Greek culture. And to do a thing like that is a truly astonishing achievement. You have to remember that Plato is writing in the 380s, or 390s, 380s, and then on to the 350s. He's going to keep on writing until he turns 80 years old. And Plato is not an easy read, and it is not what it appears to be. In other words, it's the inverse of Aristophanes. All right? What you see is what you get with Aristophanes. With Plato, so much is going on underneath. You minimally need to read the stuff we've read so far in order to be able to get a handle on it. All right? Now, the dialogues we're going to read, I'm going to change the order slightly. All right? Next week, we're going to do the Apology, the Crito, and the Phaedo, which is Socrates' death scene. Now, what you have to keep in mind is that Socrates is the final installment of the Greek hero. Greek hero 1.0 is Achilles, the Terminator. Greek hero 2.0 is Odysseus, the man of many turnings, who can fight or lie. He's a good talker, he's a good fighter, he's an all-around man. We're going to get a new kind of hero with Socrates. Socrates is version 3.0. He is a fighter. As a matter of fact, a matchless fighter. Nobody can stand in with him. But his fighting is on the mental, not the physical level. In other words, Socrates is the intellectual slayer of men. But unlike the physical slayer of men, Achilles, Socrates actually makes them better off after they've been defeated, as opposed to harming them. Because, as Socrates says in the Republic, the good man does no one any harm. Now, you will find in the Apology that Socrates directly compares himself to Achilles. Yes, indeed. Why? Well, because everybody in the audience knows Homer, and they know that Achilles was a matchless fighter. Socrates is the new, improved, ironic Achilles. Get ready for this. Achilles and his 1,000 other Greek soldiers, they lay siege to a city, and the Iliad is an epic about the destruction of a big city by a Greek army. So the Greeks destroying a city is the main theme of the Iliad. Okay, Socrates is the new improved Achilles, which means that he's not attacking the city, he's defending it. And unlike the Iliad, he's defending it against a Greek army from the inside out. In other words, the guys that have tried to destroy the new city, Athens, all right, they're also a Greek army. Problem is they're inside, and they're Athenians. Socrates says, well, one guy isn't going to put up with this, and that's me. All right? So Socrates is an ironic Achilles. All right? He's the great fighter, but unlike Achilles, who just destroys, Socrates actually improves the people he defeats. Why? Because he fights at the level of mind, not body. And being proven wrong and being shown your ignorance is actually a beneficial thing. Okay. Socrates is also the new, improved, ironic Odysseus. Yes, 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 yes. Socrates, like Odysseus, is on a journey. Odysseus takes a journey throughout the Mediterranean until he gets home to Ithaca. Socrates takes an ironic journey. It's called philosophy. Philosophy is the journey you take at home. All right? So the journey motif that animates so much of Western literature is active in the Platonic dialogues that you're going to be reading. So Socrates is the new Achilles, and Socrates is the new Odysseus. You will notice in the beginning of the major dialogues, or the most important dialogues, the Phaedrus and the Republic and the Symposium and the Protagoras and the Gorgias and what else? The Symposium. All of these dialogues begin with Socrates in motion. Remember how the Republic begins? Down I went to Piraeus. They're walking on a road. The ironic part is Socrates never goes anywhere. Why? Well, he says in the Symposium, I've only left town once, and that was because I had a military obligation. I had to go fight for the city. But apart from that, I came back home, and I stayed here. Reason why is that I'm on a journey. And I'm going home. But home is not Ithaca. Home is the realm of the gods. That's where he really belongs. That's what the whole point of the Phaedo is. So it's a new, ironic kind of homecoming. It's a spiritual rather than a physical journey. And you will note that the journey motif connects the apology, where he says, I'm going on a journey now, at the end, and the journey is, of course, to his death. And the Credo. The Credo is an underestimated dialogue. You will understand it if you look very closely and you ask yourself about the journey motif and about taking a wrong turn by running away. Socrates continues his journey by staying in jail. It's the only way he can get where he's going. He doesn't want to make a digression because that would be getting lost. And then finally, in the Phaedo, Socrates is going to make his exit, and what you're going to find in the Phaedo is the only time, actually two times, but it's in the same dialogue. In the Phaedo, we get the only two times that all the Socratic dialogues put together, a great big 2,500 page giant volume. It's the only time that Socrates laughs. All right, what does Socrates laugh at? His own death. Ironically, it's actually a good thing for him. He's surrounded by these nitwits that won't listen. He's been talking to them for 70 years, and he hasn't appreciably improved them. He says, what the hell? Where's the hell? I'm going to go. And he says, look at what I'm hoping for. I mean, there may be no afterlife. I may just get a long sleep, but that wouldn't be half bad at my age. But he says, what I'm hoping for is that I get to go to the realm of the gods, the Isles of the Blessed, where I'll meet all the good people from history, the best of the best, and I'll find more interesting people to talk to there than I did down here. Because you guys are a hopeless collection of nitwits. Now, they're all going to start crying. Why? Because for them it's a tragedy. Socrates finds this funny because his death for him is a comedy. He says, look, Aristophanes, I'll show you how to write comedy. Matter of fact, I'm going to put you into the Symposium. You'll be a comic figure. And I'm going to even the score for what you did to my master, which got him killed. All right. You're going to be understood to be a drunk and a lecher and an imbecile. And you will never get to respond to this because I'm writing after you die. So Socrates is the new improved Greek hero, version 3.0. He is beneficial to all. He is an educator. And he fights an uphill battle against a city that's trying to destroy itself. The only guy holding Athens together was Socrates, and they killed him for it. Now you'll note that when Socrates is at the end of his tether, he says, look, there's no use waiting until we get to the end of the day when the sun goes down. Look, I'm not afraid. Give me the hemlock. Let's go. And the jailer says, Socrates, when you take this hemlock, what you need to do after you drink it is walk around in circles until your legs feel heavy. Then you lay down, that'll pump the poison through your bloodstream, and that will kill you. All right, now here's the deal. Hemlock is poisonous whether you walk around or not. All right, it doesn't need that detail. The reason why Plato includes it is because walking around in circles, getting ready to be dead, is the emblem of the philosophical life. It's that journey motif again. He's finishing the journey. Where's he going? Well, in a way, nowhere. But in another sense, he's taken the greatest of all journeys. He's going to the afterlife, where he's going to be rewarded by the gods. And one of the most immediate and obvious rewards is he's not going to be surrounded by nitwits. He's going to say, look, I sent my wife and children out of here because I wanted some decorum. I didn't want them wailing and crying and all the rest of that crap. And as soon as I send them out, what do you guys do? But you all start bawling. Here's the problem, all right? You're crying about the fact that I'm dead, that I'm dying. I'm Socrates. Well, here's the deal. That's not a problem for you, all right? Because I'm not making a mess of your life. You are. You want to cry about something? Cry about the way you've chosen to live. That's pathetic. But no, that doesn't worry you. What worries you is that I'm going to be dead. I've been talking to you now. I'm 70 years old. I've been talking to you guys for 50 years. And I still haven't made the merest dent on your consciousness. All right? You're worried that I'm going to go. Well, since you wouldn't listen to me while I was alive, what difference does it make whether I'm dead? And of course, that just makes him cry even more. And Socrates says, look, I'm not trying to make you feel worse. This is actually a release. I'm down for this. I'm really ready to go. And they say that's even worse. We just cry even more. So everybody's crying because this is a new, improved kind of tragedy. And Socrates is a new, improved kind of tragic hero. Tragic heroes have to have that tragic flaw. You'll find out in Alcibiades' speech at the end of the symposium what that tragic flaw is. Socrates is trying to be too good. In other words, he's shooting for a more than human virtue, and that's impossible. And what that means is that his tragic flaw is that he's too good, which is a sort of an ironic tragic flaw if you think about it. He's also a comic hero, but the joke's on everybody else. These nitwits are all crying. And he said, look, right, if I'm not worried about being dead, I don't know why you're worrying for me. On the other hand, you still live as badly today as you did a year ago, as you did 10 years ago when I started talking to you. And that doesn't worry. No, it's no problem. That's business as usual. Where's the hemlock? Why do I have to deal with these people? And so Socrates says, with any luck, I'll find more interesting people to talk to. Tip my cup, I walk around in circles, I lay down, and I die happily. All right? So Socrates is the final installment of the Greek ideal of a human being. He's an epic hero like Achilles and Odysseus. But he's also a tragic hero, like Orestes. And he's also a comic hero, like a real-life version of the Socrates that got lampooned in the clouds. All right? So Plato, then, believes that he can write a better epic than Homer ever could. His epic is a giant ironic epic, because it's a riff on Homer. That's why he has Socrates be the new improved Achilles and the new improved Odysseus. The Platonic dialogues taken together are a giant ironic epic. The monsters like Circe and Calypso and Scylla and Charybdis that threaten Odysseus, they threaten Socrates too. But in this case, the dangerous monsters will come to him. He doesn't have to go find them. If Socrates sits there in Athens, the monsters, spiritual, not literal monsters, will show up. That's Gorgias and Protagoras and Thrasymachus. These are spiritual monsters that look like people. And as Odysseus dispatches all the monsters that threaten him on his journey, Socrates dispatches all of his. So Plato is saying, look, in the Republic, I'm going to explain to you why we have to get rid of Homer. But don't worry, I have a new, better epic. It's me. Also, we're going to have to get rid of comedy and tragedy because that teaches you all kinds of bad stuff. But fortunately, we have the Platonic dialogues, which are both comic and tragic at the same time. You will find the last line of the symposium is, get ready for this, the same man can write both comedy and tragedy. And the reason why he says that is because at that point in time, the same man is writing both comedy and tragedy, and his name is Plato. In addition, if you get a chance to read the Phaedrus, which is one of the most beautiful love poems ever written. I mean, a lot of what Plato writes, it's hard to know, it's hard to notice, but it's written in a white-hot rage. You destroyed my city, which is my hometown, destroyed my family as a result, and then you killed my master Socrates. And now Plato is going to flog Athens as he knew it and give everyone the good beating they deserve. So it's a comedy, it's a tragedy, it's an epic, and if you read the Phaedrus, you'll find out that he also there cites all kinds of lyric poets, and it's a dialogue about love, and it's beautifully poetic. If you want to actually see one of the best things, one of the things that will improve you in 1 minute, all right, look up on the internet the final prayer that Socrates says in the Phaedrus. It's one of the most beautiful things ever written. And a person reveals themselves in an unusually intimate way when you find out how they pray. Different people pray very differently for different things. Look at what Socrates prays for. Well worth your reading. Also, the Phaedrus is one of the most beautiful things ever written. Should you fall in love, show that to your beloved. All right. Now, if your beloved is discerning, your beloved will not say this is about homosexuals. It is about homosexuals, but the Phaedrus is only about homosexuals in the sense that Moby Dick is about whales. I mean, you can't fail to notice the whales or the homosexuals, but there's a lot more going on than that. All right? So Plato is always more subtle than you think. Plato is the unique, universal poet. Epic, comedy, tragedy, and lyric. Yeah?
Could we also say that he's the new historian in things like the Timaeus and the Menexenus?
Yes, that's right. I was coming to that, but I didn't think we were going to end up doing that. But yeah, that's the idea. All right. So yeah, he said, look, you want history? I'll give you history. I can do better than Thucydides or Herodotus, God help us. All right, I'll show you some history. What else is there? Oh yeah, there's religion. I'm going to start a religion. Plato's going to start a new rational monotheism. In the Republic, which you have read but not understood, all right, we find out about this new thing, the form of the good, and it's the ultimate crystal of goodness that somehow lets all of intelligibility and reality and being and light and stuff come down into this world. In other words, it's Yahweh without a personality. You don't find out about the form of the good by having it appear as a burning bush or a tornado or a man on a cross. You find out about Plato's single monotheistic God by getting really deep and rational. So, Plato is attempting to not only end Homeric epic, he also intends to get rid of Homeric religion. You've got wicked gods and goddesses doing really bad stuff. Says that won't do. That's going to make people bad, the way it made you bad. Instead, what we're going to have is a new, superior kind of religion a religion of pure rationality, of a conceptual, not a personal God. This would be the source of all truth and reality and intelligibility. All right. Remember that in the Old Testament, Yahweh gets jealous. He says, look, you can only worship me, I'm a jealous God. Plato would think the idea of God being jealous is like God being left-handed. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. God doesn't, a real unified monotheistic God doesn't have paltry human emotions like fear or anger or rage or jealousy. That's beneath his conception of God. All right? So, here's what we're going to be doing. Next week, we're going to do at least 3. We're going to do the apology, which is quick and easy, not hard. We're going to do the credo, and we're going to do the phaedo. If you have the time, and I will perhaps talk about it a bit, have a look at the Euthyphro and the Meno, too. I mean, you got them all in one purchase. You know, I had them give you all the 5 dialogues together. They're well worth reading, but if you can't get it done, just make sure that you have the phaedo done thoroughly. But all of these fit into that. All right? After that, we're going to do the symposium, in which Aristophanes will get his, and we will talk about comedy and tragedy some more. We're also going to talk about Alcibiades, and we're also going to talk about Dionysus. Here's the deal. Euripides was right. When Dionysus comes to town, take it seriously. All right? Wishing it away is not going to work. All right? And then finally, we're going to do the Republic. It's the single most important book in the Western tradition. Remember that the Bible is not a book, it's a small library. It's a collection of books. The Plato, the Republic, is one book written by one man, which covers more intellectual terrain than anything else I'm familiar with. All right. When I was in college, your age, I had Bloom for a class that was called, the title of the class was The History of Ancient Political Philosophy. All we did all term was read the Republic once a week. And it certainly is possible. I mean, he could do it, and I'm pretty sure I could do it now too. I could give you an entire term course on the Republic. I'm not making that up. If you read it that closely, it will repay that level of precision in reading. All right? You cannot read Plato too carefully. You're going to think, well, let me skip a couple of pages and get to the good stuff. You're already at the good stuff. All right? If you think that this is just filler, that means you're not understanding what's going on. Every word, every gesture, every name, everything means something. All right? So, every time there's an oath by the god, or by Apollo, or by the dog, that always means something. All right? People's behavior, as well as their arguments, means something. The fact that some of the participants in the Republic are citizens and some are medics, which is something like having a green card. They're legal aliens. That means something too. All right? The whole of the Republic is encapsulated in that first paragraph of the Republic, and also on the first page. It gets recapitulated yet again. All right? But all will be revealed. What you have to do, though, well, actually, not all will be revealed. Some will be revealed. It takes a lifetime to make sense of this book. But here's the deal. You absolutely have to expend more energy on Plato than on any of the other stuff you've done. Don't come in with a half-assed preparation. You need to be prepped, because I really want to cover a lot of stuff here, and I have a lot to say about this. Now, in the process of reading these, you might want to download. I have a series of 16 lectures on Plato, and you can get them for free on audible.com. You can they have some kind of a deal where if you sign up, you can download something for free, and then you can just resign and you get to keep it. If you download my Plato lectures, it will make the reading of the Republic and the reading of the Phaedo and the reading of the Symposium a lot more comprehensible.
They're also in the library.
They're in the library. I didn't know that. Okay, so the library has them.
So we just
Download them if it's free. I would do it, but do whatever you want.
Okay.
All right. And also I will bring in some other things, if I can find a way to get it to you. I want to show you what Platonic music really sounds like. Now, people that have a kind of unkind stance towards Plato will often caricature this as, you know, God bless America and rule Britannia, and that's what Platonic music is. Yeah, you can look at it that way, but actually, there's a wonderful 20th century musician named Eric Satie. He wrote what strikes me as the most transparent music I have ever heard. It is called Socrates, and it's 3 suites for voice and single piano. And it sounds like what I think Plato was thinking about as far as music goes. You want to make your soul orderly? Play Satie's Socrates. What they are, and this is strange, they are portions of 3 Platonic dialogues translated into French, sung. It's an amazing thing. I'm going to try and find a way to get that across to you. If not, maybe I can find a way to give you the MP3 file or something. But that's something well worth looking at. If you ever want the opposite of the Sex Pistols, what you want is Eric Satie's Socrates. It's the opposite of chaotic emotion. It's perfect, clear, transparent stillness. All right? And we're going to talk about lots of other stuff, but the point is, we read all those, 8 or 10 weeks of Greeks now, so that we would get to the point where we can actually start to read Plato. And here's the deal. It's true of the Republic, it's true of some of the others too. You can't read the Republic for the first time until you've already read it once. That's why I had you read it this summer. You read it this summer and you had no idea what was going on. Trust me on that. All right. I will show you that this book does stuff that when I was your age and first reading this, I didn't realize the book could do. It still is the most astonishing achievement of the human mind that I'm familiar with. All right? So this is where you dig in. This is where it's time to get serious. All right? If we're touch and go with some of the drama, that's not the end of the world. But you must apply yourself to Plato. And that means at least one whole day with these books. All right? There's nothing I can't read this for you. All right? So you got to pay your dues now. All right? I will see you all next week. We are doing the trial and death of Socrates. See you then. What? Pardon me? Oh, presenting. Okay. Does anyone want to present? You don't have to if you don't want to. I'm very happy with